This podcast is a collaboration between Costard and Touchstone Productions and the Dads from the Crypt podcast.
You see, my darling, it works both ways. That's the curse. Downstairs, I'm too old, and you're too young. Upstairs, I'm too young, and you're too old. See? Much better. But Harlan forgot something. He forgot that people can make love on the stairs.
So are we like immortal?
Something like that. I thought I was gonna spend eternity alone. But now you're mine, right here on this step. Forever.
Shout.
Us again! Come on and open up, man.
Where's the back door?
Places to look.
No, Clyde. Upstairs.
This place got a fire escape.
So handsome and so dumb.
What?
Upstairs, Clyde. Nobody's looking for an old man.
Upstairs. Yeah.
Open up the door, Pap. We're waiting on you down here.
I'm coming, Sheriff.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the How Not to Make a Movie podcast. I'm Alan Katz. Before we head off into the undiscovered country of this episode, I want to remind you that if you enjoy this podcast, whether on Spotify or Apple or any of the other podcast providers, or on our website or on our YouTube channel, it helps us reach more people every time you share your good feelings by hitting the like button. Algorithms, you know? And of course, you sharing us with the rest of the world, well, that's the best thing possible. Even algorithms understand what that means. And thank you in advance. So why do I say my friend Colman DeKay knows everyone? Because as you'll hear, he knows everyone. And he's so used to knowing everyone that he doesn't even realize that he knows everyone. As you'll also hear, Colman doesn't drop names. They come up in conversation because he was just having a conversation with that person, like he's having a conversation with you right now. It's been like that since Colman was a kid. His family was involved in publishing in New York. His family's Manhattan living room was a nonstop A-list literary salon. Colman became a talented writer himself, of screens small and large and of the stage. I first got to know Colman when he wrote a handful of episodes for us at Tales from the Crypt. Among Colman's episodes, In the Groove, Fatal Caper, and an absolute classic, Stared in Horror, which Colman wrote with occasional writing partner Teller from Penn and Teller. It's a great episode because of the writing and because we somehow put a whole Louisiana swamp on our stage in Los Angeles. But the writing inspired us. Something about that part of the world, southern Louisiana, the swamps around there, New Orleans especially, it has a powerful hold on Colman. He's been working out how to tell its story for a couple of years now. It's time we told his story. We've known each other quite a long time.
30 years, I think, since Crypt.
Yeah. Your path to Tales from the Crypt, it started, remind me if I think you grew up in New York City, yeah?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
City kid. What part of the city did you grow up in?
Midtown Manhattan. And I think the path to Crypt was through Teller. Because
it will, but we'll come to Teller. But let's go back a little further into so your dad was a book publisher?
My dad was a publisher. My mom was an English professor. And so
your dad published one particularly successful line of books?
Well, he published the Atkins Diet, which was towards the end of his life. But in the 70s and 80s, he published my favorite writer, who's Donald Westlake. Do you
Oh
know?
gosh. Oh, okay. These are things I wanted to know. So, all right, I knew about the Atkins, but your dad also published Donald Wesley. Wow,
Like
great.
20 of his books or something like that. And one of my greatest memories as a kid was he would come home with this, ream paper box that had Don's the carbon of Don's latest manuscript, right? Because that was only two copies, the original and the manuscript. And we would sit on the couch next to each other. He would have the bottom of the box in his lap. I would have the top of the box next to me. He'd read a page, hand it to me. I'd turn it over, put it in the box. So we were the first people to read Don's new book. And that happened 20 times, and it was the greatest thing. And my parents used to have cocktail parties for the authors at our apartment. And there would be people like James Baldwin would be there, and Norman Mailer would be there, and Don would be there. And as a kid, I'd rush past all these like really important people and find Don at the window and just like bend his ear for until he got sick of this little pish. So that was pretty
So
great.
you grew up in an environment where words were really, really important.
Yeah, they were kind of the fifth member of our family, sixth member of our family. Yeah.
So writing was a writers were looked at in your house in a very particular way.
Well, I used to have this deal with my parents where I always wanted to watch TV. And so we made a deal that for every page of something that I wrote, I would get a half an hour of TV. And so I'd sort of on a rainy weekend, I'd like lock myself in the room and just write 30 pages. And I'd go like, okay, 15 hours.
But all right, right off the bat, that's quite remarkable because for the rest of us, it was pages that we had read or said we had read, which is a
Right.
very easy thing to fake unless the other person has read it. So
Yeah, that's
none of us
true.
were required to actually put out a page of what were you expected to write?
Well, just whatever I wanted. I would write these like ripping yarns, adventure stories, and like ridiculous comedies and whatever. But the book that I revered the most was a book by Alan Sherman, if you remember him.
Sure, sure.
The comic songwriter
Hello,
called
Mudda, hello, Fada.
Hello, Mother, Hello, Father. And When the Painters Come Marching In is another one. But the reason I love that book is that I took a razor and cut out like the interior of the book, like 50 pages of the interior of the book, and that's where I hid my weed. Because I figured nobody would pull an Alan Sherman book off the shelf.
I'm sorry for Alan at the end of the day. Yeah, that's the last book anybody would suspect of anything. Stay it on that shelf, guys.
Yeah.
Wow. Where did you go to school?
I went to this very eccentric boarding school called St. Bernard's, um, which I didn't realize how eccentric it was until they started sending me DVDs of, the way it is now. And I was like, "Well, that's nuts." Right? Where in seventh grade, a friend of mine and I decided we wanted to learn Greek. And so we like pitched our Latin teacher and he said, "Yeah, I know a little Greek." And so we would stay after school for like an hour a week to learn Greek. But it was nuts. And then I went to this very hoity-toity boarding school called Exeter in New Hampshire
Sure, sure.
until they kicked me out.
What'd you
And
do?
nothing. I hung
That's what they
around.
all say.
I hung around with stoners, right? And
Well,
I had already stopped smoking weed by the time I was 13 because I didn't like it. But the dean called me into his office and he said, "We suspect you smoke marijuana." And I said, "Well, actually, I don't." And he goes, "If you look like a duck and you act like a duck and you hang around with ducks, people are going to think you're a duck." And so I went, "Whack, whack, whack." And they didn't invite me back. So then I went to this Quaker school in Pennsylvania called George School, which was great. It was like being let out of prison. And that was where I also got a teacher to teach something that was off the curriculum, off the menu. I wanted to read Ulysses, and I went to the English department. I said, "Is there anybody in the English department that knows Ulysses?" And they said, "Well, yeah, this one guy is a Joyce expert." And I said, "Well, would he teach me?" And he said, "Well, if you get 20 other kids." So I turned into Tom Sawyer, whitewashing the fence. I went to all my friends and I said, "It's just one book, one book all semester, and we get a credit." And so I got them.
You did not give them a clue as to what that book
What that
was.
book was? No, I said it's I don't know what it is. I haven't read it. So that was good.
And okay, so you read Ulysses. You had this terrific class on Ulysses. How did that go? It's a great book to have a single class on. My God.
Right, right. And they weren't lying. I mean, this guy Ken Keskinen really was a Joyce expert, and so he had great insight into the book. Who
That
knew?
must have been an awesome educational experience. I'm sick with envy.
It was pretty fun.
I'm
And
sure.
we also that year we also had mock elections. It was a presidential year. It was 72, I guess. And there was this guy named Scoop Jackson running. And each history class got to pick a candidate. And my class picked Scoop Jackson. And we had to hire or get somebody from the class to be that candidate to get up on stage and make a speech. And so we picked the biggest slob we could find in the class and wrote a speech saying something like, "I ain't no dirty t-shirt. I ain't no fat man's toy." I mean, this was like what his speech was. It was a great school. Great, wonderful school. And then I went to Colgate, upstate New York, which was very, very cold.
It's
And
terrific that you had the experience with Ulysses basically as a high school student.
at like, what would I have been? Like 17, 18, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, that wasn't a college class. That was before college.
Right. Right. And then, yeah. And then I went to Colgate where I met this guy, this very, very eccentric student who it turned out was the world's, or at least the American authority, number one authority on Finnegan's Wake. And he was a student at Colgate. So,
Wow.
and
Now that's an impenetrable book.
I know, it's impossible. If Ulysses is a coloring book compared to Finnegan's Wake.
I heard I read a theory, excuse me, a theory once that part of the issue at hand with Finnegan's Wake was that it was all typed in Paris by French typists who were trying to read the scribble scrabble in the
Yeah.
margins of the manuscript.
Right.
And
I believe that.
it was at times it was incredibly hard to read. And so some of what might be that book's impenetrability is a mechanical problem.
Right. I'm sure. I'm sure. And then
Yeah.
Joyce probably said, "Oh, that's fine." You know.
Hey, and then there's that. Yeah. I remember once picking it up and leaving through it and just nah.
Right.
Nah.
My friend Ken Quapis just read it recently, and he considers it one of the signature achievements of his life. Not Finnegan's Wake, Ulysses. And it took him a year to get through it. He said, "I'm very proud of myself. I got maybe 3 pages a day, which is kind of a lot."
It is a dense read.
Yeah, yeah, but funny as hell.
Uh, I have not read much of it. I've read parts of it, and all the Molly Bloom parts of the story. But whenever I've the parts of it that I've read, the detail of just that day in the
It's
life is
one day,
so,
right?
it's just so rich.
Yeah.
It's just a remarkable creative achievement.
Hmm. And so, well, Ken was so proud of himself when he finished it that
Bravo to him.
he took his wife to Dublin and they did the Leopold Bloom tour
On Bloomsday.
themselves. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
how cool. How
I know,
cool. How cool.
I know.
All right. So what got you from New York and being an East Coast guy out to the West Coast?
Well, I went to Santa Fe for what was supposed to be a week, right? And then got involved with this woman and we got engaged.
Wait,
And
okay. What year is this?
this is like 1980,
1980. Okay.
right? And but it soon became obvious that she wasn't ever going to leave Santa Fe and I wasn't ever going to stay in Santa Fe. So that wasn't going to work. So it was at this point August and it was blistering hot in New York. It was like 1,500 miles to New York and only like 1,000 miles to here. And there was a ride. Somebody was driving out here. So I said, okay. So I came out here knowing one person.
All right. So you arrive in LA simply because you had a ride headed in this direction.
That's right. That's
All
right.
right.
And
When you arrive, how do you what did you do first? How did you set up shop?
well,
How old are you at this time?
24, something
All
like
right. So,
this.
so you're 24 and you know one person. So you're sleeping on that person's couch more or
Right.
less.
And then I
Okay.
joined this theater group, figuring I have to make as many friends as I can as fast as I can because I don't know how to drive. And so I'm going to need people to drive me around.
Wow, you made it so hard. And back in the 80s, this was not the easiest town to get around without a car. If I
No,
recall right, that was pre Uber and Lyft.
as you recall, right? It was like
By a
40
generation
years
or so.
before.
Yeah.
But somebody sold me his 1970 Plymouth Duster for $400, and it came with a rotisserie and a set of golf clubs in the trunk. And so
Didn't they
well,
all?
yeah, I think was a standard. It was standard with it, but I parked it in my driveway where I'd have to look at it every day, and it would just shame me into learning how to drive it. And so I had some
What
friends.
color was it?
Was white
Oh,
with
okay. All right.
all right, and so I had people t drive get me to drive around the Pacific Design Center parking lot until I got it.
It's like how I taught my kids, but it wasn't there. It was at one of the cemeteries. I
Right,
figured if they bumped into something, they wouldn't kill
right,
anybody.
just knock over a tombstone. But
Fixable.
so that I finally got so ashamed of that I got a stick Mustang, which I also didn't know how to drive.
Well, you
And
just made it harder for yourself.
I was
You don't need
figuring
to drive on a
my
stick.
next thing would be a helicopter, right? But so what we finally did was we hauled the duster into the backyard and took a sawzall and sliced off the top, right? So it was just engine, trunk, and passenger section with the roof sawed off, and turned it into a planter. Where it stayed for like 8 years.
That's hilarious.
It was well recycling.
Okay.
Yeah,
So, all right. So you decided that you liked LA.
I liked LA. I came as a baby actor and was hired for this show called Happy Days as in a recurring role, but then we immediately went on strike. And so
You got
so
hired to be on Happy Days?
yeah, I never was on it.
But
I
oh my God, imagine if there hadn't been a strike, your whole career path could have been completely different,
completely
Coleman.
different. Yeah.
Oh my God, that's crazy. That's
Yeah.
nuts.
But so in that time, I wrote a letter to the LA Times, which they published as an article, and somebody from California Magazine read it and brought me in to be their theater critic for some reason. And so that was my first journalism job. Um, and that it was, the print community, which doesn't exist anymore, was small, and especially the theater criticism part of the community. And so, I got jobs all over town writing for the Times and the LA Weekly and the late lamented Herald Examiner. Um, yeah, and so that sort of took over.
And the next thing you know, you are a writer instead.
Apparently, yeah. But my favorite thing that I wrote for them was not a piece of theater criticism. I wrote for the weekly. I had a friend who worked in the prison system, and he was directing a production of 12 Angry Men, which in some juvie place in Chino, which was going to be the first prison production that was open to the public. So it was a kind of a big deal. And so I went through all the auditions and the rehearsals and the performance. And I remember during the auditions, all these kids would come up and do their bit. And there was one guy who was pretty good. And in the table meeting afterwards, they were going through the auditions and got to that kid and they went, nah, 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 I don't think so. And I said, no, he was pretty good. Well, why not? And he said, my friend Peter said, because anytime he's on stage, everybody in the audience will start barking. And I said, why? And he said, because he's in for fucking all the dogs in his neighborhood. I don't know. So,
Oh gosh.
so
Oh man. Of all the reasons not to get somebody.
right, exactly. I mean, some of these kids were
It's in your
murderers.
contract, man. You can't fuck all the dogs in the neighborhood.
That's right. What are you thinking? But so the article came out, and I told that story in the article. And about a month later, I heard that the kid was suing the LA Weekly and the California prison system on his argument was it was just one dog.
So it's the S.
Yeah.
S. It's the letter S he objects
That's right.
to.
He was suing over the letter S. So yeah.
Oh, that's very funny. Now, your path to Crypt, you said earlier, Teller kind of was part of that. How did your relationship with Teller begin?
All right. I interviewed them for the weekly when they were first arriving in LA. And it was the first article about them that ever came out in California. And I remember I asked Teller, not having seen the show, I said, is your show scary? And Teller said, well, I think there are parts of Bambi that are much more terrifying than our show. And he was right. And so we just sort of became friends. And I don't know, they used to do this seance, which was a private thing with a maximum of 8 guests, right? And I said, why just 8? And he said, well, we want to keep it small, and we have to charge a lot so we can not have to play frats. And I said, well, how much do you charge? And they said, $500. And that was their going rate at the time. And so a couple months later, it was my friend Amanda Plummer was doing a show at the La Jolla Playhouse, and it was her birthday coming up. And I said, I'll make you a trade. I'm not going to pay you the $500, but if you come down to La Jolla and do a seance, I'll do a piece about it for the weekly, and maybe you get some gigs. And so they came down, and we held it in the trap room under the stage at the La Jolla Playhouse. And they were very, very stern. Their performance uh, uh, personas they were very stern and very angry with each other at the beginning, right? And people came in, including John Goodman and people like that, and they locked the door. And I said, "Wait a minute, this is for Amanda, and she's not here." And Penn said, "I don't care. She's late." So Amanda didn't even get to see the thing. But the whole bit was we were in this tight little space around this table, and Penn and Teller were above us doing a card trick that Teller blew, right? He blew the punchline, and Penn started screaming at him, and the whole idea was to make us as uncomfortable as possible. And yeah, so that was part of getting to know them, and then as I mentioned,
Now,
go.
Teller is, because I've had the pleasure of working with Teller and having meals with Teller and
Yeah.
conversations with Teller. First of all, he can talk,
Yes, you can.
and he is an incredibly articulate
Yeah.
man. He is to call him bright. He is incredibly
Yeah.
smart, well-read, really well thought out. He's really quite a lot of fun just to
And a gentleman,
shoot the shit
perfect
with.
gentleman. Yeah.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, he is so well-mannered. He's a lovely person.
Yeah.
He's almost angelic
Yeah.
in a way, and yet so cruel.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, okay. I got two stories to tell you about my early encounters with them. One is they had this ABC special called Phobophilia that they were working on, which means love of fear. And they asked me to put together a script based on a bunch of their bits. And so I did. And we sent it to Standards and Practices, which is at Fox, which is like one lady, right? And she was so appalled by the script that she said there have to be like page one changes to this. And we went, why? And she said, well, look at this, and pointed to a page which was a bit about the Three Stooges as carpenters with a table saw, right? So you know that's going to be trouble when it's in Penn and Teller's hands. And of course, somebody gets his arm cut off or his hand cut off and holds it up. And as I said in the script, blood spews high and hard over the audience. I said, we can't do that. And so ultimately, they passed on the show, which we eventually filmed and showed in England. But uh, after this happened, a friend of ours was at Fox, and she walked by the censor's office, right, and poked her head in just to see who this person was, right? And it turned out it was like this little old lady with silver hair and big glasses, and above her desk was that poster of the cat hanging by its claws from a branch, and it said, "Hang in there, baby." So we knew what kind of cornball person this was.
Oh dear, oh dear.
All right.
It's like I grew up in Maryland,
Mm-hmm.
and Maryland was, I think, one of the last states to have a state board of film censors.
Uh-huh.
And the woman who ran it was this little teeny Catholic lady named Mary Vera.
They always are.
Yeah, they seem to find that job, and
Right.
Mary Vera was notoriously humorless, and she was a preachy little cow, and God, of course, one of the people whose films did not pass muster with her was the Baltimore's John Waters.
Ah, okay.
And there were funny pitched battles where those films, and the point was when Pink Flamingos was put in front of her, the point was to make her uncomfortable as hell.
Right.
That was the point, was not to get past because it was never going to happen. It was to know how horrible an experience it was going to be for her to watch that movie
that's great.
through to the end when Divine picks up the dog shit and eats it in one shot. So yeah, film censors, man, they get what's coming to them.
Right.
It may be coming. They may be coming to us, but
yeah,
a conversation for another podcast.
Well, just the smart thing to do is to put in something that's so egregious that you know it's going to grab their attention and it's not going to pass, and then put in the thing that you really want in. So they skip over that, right? So you could have this big argument about something that you never intended to put in the movie.
Yeah, the guy doesn't fuck dogs; he fucks just one dog.
Right, right, exactly.
So you begin this relationship with Penn and Teller and working with them creatively, and you get it into your heads. You guys approached us to do an episode. Wasn't that how it worked?
Yes, we had a pitch for some like evil Santa thing, and you and Gil said, "Oh, we don't really do Santa stuff," or maybe it was a vampire thing, and they said we don't do vampire stuff. You said we don't do vampire stuff, so I said, "Well, wait a minute. Here's an idea that Mick Garris and I had sketched that teeny tiny little kernel of an idea like years before." And so Teller and I left the first meeting with you guys, which was the We Don't Do Vampires, and went to some coffee shop in Toluca Lake and wrote a thing on his laptop, wrote a treatment on his laptop. And this was before real internet, but they had some kind of a modem in the back of the restaurant that we could plug into. So we plugged into it and sent it to you guys that afternoon. So that was good. Yeah.
And that probably evolved into the episode Stared in Horror, which was the first one that you and Teller wrote.
Right. Which is
a terrific episode.
An amazing production. I mean, I came on the set. It's set in an old southern New Orleans, Louisiana mansion, plantation.
In a swamp.
In a swamp.
In a swamp.
And you guys didn't just build a facade. You built a mansion and surrounded it with an actual swamp.
Yeah.
I was like, a two-story mansion because that was important to the plot.
Yeah, and it was practical on the other side.
Right. It was
unbelievable. One of the things that this was a testament to Greg Melton's sheer genius, and Stephen Hopkins, who directed the episode, his ability to think on his feet, but to understand how to make the audience think it's this when really you're just shooting this little teeny piece. So you make them feel the grandeur, but you've only shot a teeny piece. So yes, there was even a chase through the swamp, and you feel like there's a chase through the swamp, but man, we shot it in a narrow little space of studio.
Right. And nobody's going to realize that you're running through the same bulrushes 6 times.
Yeah. And then to cap it all off, when he arrives, we did a matte painting shot. Really? A really cool old-fashioned matte painting shot, so that really the camera was set at the far edges of where we could shoot on the stage, and we basically drew we blocked out a lot of the exterior that we didn't want the camera to see, and we just saw what we had on stage, which was this swamp. Swamp and the house, and then we surrounded that black in the process with swamp and
with more swamp.
And so it looks like, we're sitting in the middle of a swamp.
Right.
When really it's all smoke and mirrors.
Right.
Of course. But yes, so the episode was about a guy, he's an escaped prisoner, ends up at this old mansion in the middle of the swamp. There seems to be an old lady and an attractive young girl living there.
First he meets the old lady.
Indeed.
And he thinks, I can knock her over with no problem.
Right.
And so he's thinking about she goes to get him a drink or a cup of tea or something like that, and he's plotting her demise. And all of a sudden he hears this young voice from upstairs, and he goes, and at the top of the stairs is a beautiful woman. And she, over time, she explains that her husband during the Civil War had come home early and caught her cheating and put a curse on her that whenever she was at the bottom of the stairs, she was ancient and so could never leave the mansion. But when she went to the top of the stairs, she became young, yes? And so the young woman at the top of the stairs, they have this seductive banter, and he tries to run up the stairs, and she stops him and says, "You're gonna get old," because it's a reverse thing for anybody else. So we have to meet in the middle. And somehow she disappears. Meanwhile, the sheriff are
The cops are still looking for him.
right with dogs and stuff. And
It's the South, after all.
that's right. R. Lee Ermey was the cop, as I
Yes, he
remember.
was.
And so to escape the cop and the dogs, he runs up into the attic, and the big blow off is that you see that he's become like 150 years old and
It
can't
was
get
D.B.
it.
Sweeney was the convict, and Rachel Tickerton was
That's right. Was the girl.
the old woman
A-
and the pretty girl.
Right. And it was, for its time, it was amazing makeup, age makeup.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah.
Everybody was firing full on all 8 cylinders for this baby.
It was great. It was really fun. It was amazing to see it because I didn't see any of it until it aired, and it was a revelation. I was like, wow.
It was one
And
of those shows where, damned if we didn't do a lot with a little.
yeah, exactly. That's right, because your budget had been cut back a lot, right? By that
Yes, it
time.
had been, because we had succeeded at the number that we succeeded. So they figured, well, if you can succeed at that, you can succeed at this number too.
Right.
So we
Amazing.
were punished for succeeding,
Right.
as
Yeah.
one sometimes, as one frequently is in this fucking town.
Right.
The experience wasn't so once you got onto our radar, we kind of used you, and I'll use the word used to
I was happy to be used.
to rewrite a couple of other projects.
Right.
That same season, you did a rewrite of In the Groove, which
Right. Which was about a Howard Stern kind of shock jock who plans a murder that goes terribly wrong, as I remember.
Mel Ferrer played the
Miguel Ferrer,
I'm
yeah.
sorry, Miguel Ferrer, Miguel Ferrer, yeah, Miguel Ferrer.
That's his uncle.
Um, and you also rewrote one called Surprise Party.
Right. About a guy who kills his dad, right? For the inheritance.
Jake Busey, yeah, was the
Uh-huh.
character. It was an Elliot Silverstein script.
Right. Cat Ballou?
Who
I'm sorry.
yes, Elliot got he won an Oscar for Cat Ballou.
Right.
He also directed A Man Called Horse.
Wow.
He directed a lot of episodes of Tales from the Crypt, but he was a very difficult director to work with, only because he was very demanding about the script. Elliot stepped onto the set with the whole thing cut in his head already. He knew exactly what he wanted. He didn't need anything else. And so he wanted the script to reflect what was in his head, just so we weren't wasting anyone's time shooting stuff that we weren't going to ever need or use. It just wasn't going to make, he knew it. He knew what the cut was.
Right.
And so I don't remember if we attached you to Elliot's hip, or was that still one of my
That was your job,
jobs?
but I think you gave me very specific notes saying the
Yeah.
director needs it this way, this way, this way, this way. Yeah.
Elliot was very super particular, but hey, he won an Oscar and I didn't. So
That's
yeah,
right.
I need to shut up. Uh, then you were you wrote one of the episodes that we took to England, Fatal Caper, which Bob Hoskins directed,
Right.
and
And starred in.
he had a small part in
Or was in it?
Natasha Richardson,
Natasha Richardson.
alas,
Yeah.
who, man, that was an unfortunate. That was unfortunate.
Yeah.
Uh,
You
uh,
guys must have been shocked
yeah, that just
having worked with her recently.
heartbreaking, crushing. Oh my God,
Yeah.
what a terrible thing to happen to a nice person.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, but I think by that time, I think that seventh season, I've never, I think I looked at that episode once after we made it, just because I've never watched really any of the episodes we shot in England, because by then I know I was completely out of gas on that show, and I
Right.
felt like I just wasn't delivering. I wasn't doing my job.
Did you do the whole season in
Oh
London?
God, yeah, we did the whole season in England.
Yeah.
The best part of shooting in, well, the reason that we took it to England was because after shooting Bordello of Blood in Vancouver, which was a fuck you to the IA, our union, we continued the fuck you to the union by not shooting the last season of Crypt in LA, continuing to take it away from our union, our crew,
Right.
and we took it to London instead. Now, it wasn't a terrible idea. It was, certainly shooting Crypt in London was a better idea than shooting Bordello of Blood in Vancouver.
Right.
But shooting it in London gave us the opportunity to, hey, you want to put a show in a castle?
Uh-huh.
Show in
Yeah.
castles. The problem that we faced was that they shoot things differently there for various very specific reasons, and we came over without adjusting our production model, which was 3 days, 2 days out and 3 days in, because we built a lot.
Right.
Well, we built a lot in LA because it's cheap to build stuff. It's not so cheap to build stuff in England. Wood, for instance, really expensive.
No
So you don't
kidding.
build a lot of things with wood.
Uh-huh. Well, you got
Sets.
castles. You got castles.
So you go to locations a lot, but getting to these places, that's where you're going to be shooting all day. Don't be thinking you're going to shoot two places in one day, because you cannot get around that country
Right.
with a film unit anywhere near fast enough to do such a thing.
Huh.
So our whole model was completely thrown on its head. And our production manager, the first one that we hired, a very nice man who had done a show, an American show about, like a medieval show by American producers, and he had been the local line guy, and he assured us that he had everything in hand, and he had nothing in hand. He did not. He was so afraid of offending anybody that he led us down multiple terrible garden paths that we had no business on. At the end of the day, he was the first person I ever had to fire in my entire life. That was not fun, but he was so happy to go. And then I had to fire the accountant who he had hired because she had no idea where we were. And that was hard because she begged to keep her job. Like, oh my God, that was horrible.
And that was midstream. You had to fire them, or
Yeah. But then we hired a guy named Dominic Fulford, and he set us right, and we got our asses through the rest of the season. But it should have been so much fun doing Tales from the Crypt there.
Yeah.
It was fun being there. It was not fun doing the show there.
Oh, well.
And that was no one's fault but our own.
Because you came in with the US model. Right.
Because we didn't think about it. We thought, just transplant it from there to here. It'll work.
Right.
Stupid tourists, dumb American tourists, Anyway, but so after Tales from the Crypt, there was life. Where did you go after Tales from the Crypt? Now we worked on a series with Penn and Teller, but that went to nothing. So forget about that.
Right. Well,
some cool stuff.
Well, I made a movie called Bloodhounds of Broadway, which had an amazing cast at the time, including, Madonna and Rutger
Yeah, an
Hauer.
amazing cast, Bloodhounds of. I mean, good God, what a where did that project come from?
Uh, there was this show called American Playhouse on PBS,
Mm.
and I reconnected with a high school friend who was visiting LA to meet with some people, and we met at another high school friend's house, and he said, "So I have this deal that American Playhouse wants to do something with me, but I've pitched them two things that they thought were really disgusting." And
What did they think was disgusting?
oh,
Why would that be their response to a project that you pitched them?
some Stephen King thing where a kid shoots up a classroom and then William Burroughs
Okay.
junkie. It's not really in
Oh,
their,
okay.
it's not really in their
All right.
wheelhouse.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so
What were
Howard
you
said,
thinking?
It's his thing. He had done a brilliant documentary biography of Burroughs, of William Burroughs, and so they were good friends. In fact, he scored for Burroughs a bunch of time in Alphabet City, and one time he was, I guess they were selling smack out of this little basement room, right, in a abandoned building, right, and so he's in there with these people who are shooting up while he's there trying to score, and there's about to be a raid. And so they slam down all the windows and doors and stuff, and they're stuck in there. And Howard said that all these junkies started like turning their eyes to him, going like, "Who's this guy who seems pretty healthy? Who's here just at the moment the cops uh, jump in? Is he part of them?" And so he was like, they better leave. These cops had better leave soon, or I'm going to die. Right. And they did. And there was another time when Burroughs said, when Howard went out to score for him, and Burroughs said, "I'm coming with you." And Howard said, "Bill, no, you really shouldn't." He goes, "I'm coming with you." And so he gets puts on this long coat so he can look like a bandit in his mind, and puts this gun inside the coat. This is William Burroughs, if you can picture, just imagine him. Um, and so Howard, they're eloping down the street with Burroughs on his cane and stuff, feeling like a badass. And they're about a block from the pickup joint. And Howard goes, "Bill, why don't you wait in this drugstore here? I'll be right back." And Bill went, "Oh, all right." And so he didn't actually go in for the score. But anyway, so Howard said, "I think I have one more good meeting with them um, before they decide I'm completely crazy. Do you have any ideas?" And I said, "Well, you could pick up this William Kinsella book, or you could do this or do that. And while you're at it, why don't you get some Damon Runyon?" And he said, "Oh, okay, I'll do that." And so I figured I'd get some Damon Runyon too. So I went into this local bookstore and bought the last copy of a collection of stories called Bloodhounds of Broadway. And Howard walked in apparently like 15 minutes later and asked for the book. And they said, "Oh, we just sold the last one." And Howard said, "Yeah, and I know who you sold it to." But eventually we got together and we decided to blend four short stories and set it all in one night and blah 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 blah. And it
It
was a
it made really an amazing cast. You mentioned Madonna, but all right, Joseph Summer, Jennifer Grey, Tony Azito, Rutger Hauer, Matt Dillon, Anita Morris, Alan Ruck, Dina Manoff, Randy Quaid, Julie Haggerty, Issei Morales, Fisher Stevens, uh, 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 God, amazing, just amazing names.
I
And,
know,
and I'm leaving out a bunch.
right. Well,
Steve Buscemi.
uh-huh.
Holy cow! Who everyone,
And
even Johnny
Burroughs.
Crawford
And
from
Burroughs
from
played
the
a
Runaway.
butler.
Yeah, I mean, wow, just an amazing
Yeah.
cast. What happened?
It was made under three regiments at Columbia.
Oh
Right.
boy. Oh boy.
And
Oh
by
shit.
the third one, they had no idea what it was. They cut our editing budget, and it wasn't the movie that we wanted to make, and blah blah blah. And I could tell very ugly stories, but I won't. Um, but yeah, I mean, I remember going in for Howard at this point had passed away from AIDS, and so I went in for a marketing meeting with the Columbia execs, and they said, "Oh, we could run an ad or two in the Times, but you know, TV advertising really doesn't mean anything. It doesn't bring anybody in." And I went, "Oh, that's why you spend millions and millions of dollars on it." But I did get a lifelong friend out of that who was the head of publicity, whose name was Mark Gill. And I used to introduce him as the only person at Columbia who never lied to me. So we've been friends since then.
It's good to have a friend or two like like that.
Yeah, yeah, he's great. He's great.
You have an affinity for New Orleans.
I do. I do.
Where where did your affinity for Nolans originate?
During Bloodhounds, I remember Fisher and Matt, or Fisher said, "I hear there's this jazz festival that they have in New Orleans. I'm gonna go. You want to come?" And so Matt and Fisher and I went down there for the New Orleans Jazz Fest, which was very, very small at the time. The next year, I loved it so much that the next year Tom Sawyered again and got like 15 or 20 friends to come. By year following that, I had 40 people. The year following that, I started looking for housing in January for something that happened at the end of April. And I just sort of, just became used to the place. And ultimately, I made a lot of musician friends, and ultimately wound up writing this 40 song cycle with my friend Paul Sanchez, based on a book called Nine Lives,
And that's
which
what the musical is called, Nine
the
Lives.
musical is called Nine Lives. And it's an oral history of New Orleans from Hurricane Betsy in 65 through Katrina in 2005, through the voices of nine people from completely different walks of life. And we just, well, the way it happened was, I told Paul to buy the book and read it. And he said, "Why?" And I said, "Because we're going to make a Broadway musical out of it." And he said, "No, we're not." And, then, I called him a week later, said, "Did you get the book?" And he goes, "No, no, no, I haven't." And then so I sent it to him, right? I had Amazon send it to him. And then I called him again, said, "Have you read it?" And he goes, "No." And so I flew down to New Orleans without telling him and showed up at his door and said, "Okay, I'm going to sit in this chair across the room from you. You're going to read the book. Read the first 40 pages. If you don't like it, that's it. That's the end. If you like it, keep on reading." I watched him read it and he was going like, oh, 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 okay. All right, I get it now. And he said, "This is really great." The writer was Dan Baum, who was a New Yorker writer at the time. And he said, "This is great. What do we do?" And I said, "Well, it's too bad I'm leaving tomorrow night. It would be great if we got one song in, but I'm leaving tomorrow night." And so he said, "Well, let's write one." So we wrote a song based on a story from the book. And I said, "It's too bad we can't make a demo of this." And he said, "What are you talking about? This is New Orleans." So with 5 phone calls, we got a band together at a recording studio and put together this demo and sent it to the author's agent, who gave it to Dan. And Dan said, "I have no idea who Coleman and Paul are, but how the fuck did they get John Boutte and Matt Perrine and Shamar Allen and blah, 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 blah? Of course they can have the rights." And so we wound up writing 39 songs, which is way too many. We got a grant from Pepsi, hired like 110 musicians and singers local and recorded the whole thing, all 39 songs. It was, of course, a big local sensation. There was a show called Treme, the HBO show, that was
Mhm.
shooting at the same time. And Eric Overmyer, who's the producer, one of the producers, said I ran into him on the street and he goes, "What the hell is going on? You guys are the talk of the set. Like everybody who comes in has just come from a session with you guys." It was really quite good. And
A great project. Really,
it
uh,
was, yeah.
wow, you that it that you put it together and where is it now? What is
Well,
its
it
future?
had, well, here's the thing. Our conceit was, since it's set over a 40-year period, we wrote the songs in the musical style of each era, right? So we wrote like 60s soul for Irma Thomas and then all the way up to like hip hop and rap and rock and roll and stuff like that. We took it to the public theater and they commissioned, we decided that to get them pregnant rather than writing the book ourselves, we would have them have them pick somebody that they liked to write it. And unfortunately, they picked this one woman who had a like a was shortlisted for a Pulitzer that year, and she said, "Yeah, I'll put together a book." On the condition that I do it on my own without having any meetings with you guys. We went, that's collaboration. But we sort of went,
Never a
okay.
good sign.
No, 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 not from the beginning. And so she showed up like a year and a half later with this script that one was all set in a bar, like one set thing. And two, the only orchestration was a brass band. And we said, well, we were pretty specific about the styles of music, and it's not all brass band songs. And she went, well, that's what I want to do. And so we had a reading of the script without the songs. And it was 2.5 hours long without the songs. And so we just sort of went, I think we have different ideas about this.
That's painful. That's what a
Yeah.
painful process to go through and all that time and whatever the money was. And really to come out the other end with something
Wrong.
so disconnected from
Right.
really the organic idea
Right.
that motivated everybody to want to do this.
Right. But on
I'm
the
sorry to
upside,
hear that.
it remains a sensation in New Orleans. There's been about a dozen different performances of the full score with different scripts and different concepts, and it keeps on getting revived locally. So that's good. And I made 110 really good friends.
Well, hey, at the end of the day, what could be better than that?
Hmm.
You working on anything right now, Coleman?
Yeah. Um, another, well, during the strike, I figured I'd fool them by writing a Broadway musical. And so I started thinking about doing the Chuck Berry story. And um, which is great because you don't have to write any music, right?
Right,
And
right, right.
and so
Just lay out the songs in a particular order,
that's right.
little bit of linkage. There's your show.
Well, make the songs fit the story you're telling at that moment, right?
Yeah. Just write the
And
transitions, man.
right. And so at one point I wanted a collaborator, and so I hooked up with this black screenwriter friend of mine from New Orleans, and we did all our due diligence. We read 3 biographies of the guy and listened to all his music like 100 times, and started working on it. We had a great time. Um, then we said, okay, well let's each write a scene. And so we came back with my scene was comic, right? His scene was very serious and very political. And we talked it over for a couple of weeks, and finally I said, your version of this would probably get you shortlisted for a, a Nobel Prize, in literature. Mine might get on a good day, might get me a paragraph in Entertainment Weekly online. But we just see things differently. So I continued on my own, and then I found out that somebody very notable has bought the life rights. I'm not going to say who it is to Chuck, and it wants to make a TV movie. So I'm talking to them about like, do you need a writer? I've done all the sweat work. All right.
Really and truly, why
Why
not?
not? Why not?
Well, my fingers are certainly crossed for you.
Thank you. Thank you. It's fun. It's a hell of a story. He
Oh my
wasn't a,
gosh.
he wasn't a
Uh,
great
of,
guy, but
of course, in my mind, I have other plans for you, but that's a whole other conversation. Coleman, it is this conversation is so overdue.
yeah, I know. I know.
And really truly, you know so many people, and we've scratched just the surface of it is one of the things is you're remarkable that you have acquired this many acquaintances, friends, and fellow travelers.
They're good people.
Is quite remarkable. That's a story, maybe a podcast unto itself. But I thank you so much just for sitting
Thank
in
you. Thank you.
today.
This is
And
fun.
oh gosh, let's do this again.
Let's do it. And maybe we'll do it earlier in the day so that we could do the
Yeah.
backlighting that you like so much.
Well, hey, the backlighting is great. And anyway, hey, we'll see you next time, everyone. And thank you as always. The How Not to Make a Movie podcast is executive produced by me, Alan Katz.